everybody, and hi, I'm Amy Goodman. As 2013 draws to a close, As 2000, I'm just 999-3877 to make your holiday gift to Democracy Now! Today. And thank you so much for listening. From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
قرر مجلس الوزراء إعلان جماعة. The government has decided to declare the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist group and its organization a terrorist organization as defined in Article 86 of the Penal Law.
Egypt escalates its crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood and other critical voices, arresting 4 Al Jazeera reporters. We'll go to Egypt to speak with Democracy Now!'s Sharif Abdel-Quddus, as well as the Committee to Protect Journalists. 2/3 of the journalists killed this year were in the Middle East, the deadliest country, Syria. Then, on the last day of 2013, we'll look at 10 hopeful things that happened in 2013 to get you inspired for what's to come. We'll speak with Sarah Van Gilder, editor-in-chief of Yes Magazine, and we'll go to the Chaos Communication Congress in Hamburg, Germany. Among those who spoke was WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
There will be no person that has not been exposed to this ideology of transparency and understanding and wanting to keep the internet, which we were born into, free. This is the last free generation.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Iraq is capping off its worst year of violence since the height of the U.S. occupation. According to the United Nations, more than 7,150 civilians and 950 security forces have been killed this year, the highest annual total since 2008. On Monday, at least 13 people were killed in clashes when Iraqi police raided a Sunni protest camp in Anbar province. Protesters had been camped out for a year to protest the marginalization of Sunnis by the Shiite-led government. More than 40 Sunni lawmakers announced their resignations following the raid. Separate attacks across Iraq killed at least 11 other people. Police in Russia have rounded up dozens of people in the city of Volgograd following the twin bombings of a railway station and trolley bus. The toll from the attacks has risen to 34. No one has claimed responsibility, and it's unclear whether any of those detained today were involved. Russia is due to host the Winter Olympics in Sochi in just over a month. Rebels in South Sudan are claiming to have retaken the key town of Bor after a fierce battle with government forces. Bor is considered a crucial point on the path to the capital, Juba. Rebel leader Riek Machar has also reportedly agreed to enter peace talks with the South Sudanese government in Ethiopia. The news comes after the Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni raised the prospect of regional intervention against the rebels. Museveni said East African countries had agreed to take action last week if the rebels did not agree to a ceasefire by today. He spoke to reporters on Monday.
We gave Riek Machar some 4 days to respond. And if he doesn't, we shall have to go for him, all of us. That's what we agreed in Nairobi.
Mr. President, when you say you go for him, what does that mean? And
The violence in South Sudan has killed more than 1,000 people. Speaking on Monday, Gerard Araud, the UN Security Council president for this month, said 180,000 people have been displaced.
The situation of the human rights is also pretty worrying. There are reports of torturing, killing, disappearance, and on ethnically targeted violence, actually. So the human rights sector or component of the mission has been upgraded, and investigations and reporting have been upgraded, so there could be accountability at the end of this tragedy.
Troops in the Democratic Republic of Congo quashed a coordinated series of attacks on the airport a military barracks, and the headquarters of the state television station Monday. In total, about 100 people were killed. The attackers were followers of a pastor who's accused the government of harassing his supporters. The United Nations is urgently appealing for access to a Palestinian area of Damascus where people are dying from hunger. A UN official says some 20,000 Palestinians are trapped inside the Yarmouk district of Damascus amidst fighting between the regime and rebels. Since the last delivery of UN aid in September, 15 people have died there from malnutrition, including 5 this past weekend. The watchdog tasked with overseeing the dismantling of Syria's chemical weapons is set to miss its deadline to remove the deadliest materials from Syria. The organization had planned to transport the materials to the port of Latakia and ship them out of the country by today. But the group has cited roadblocks ranging from bad weather to logistical hurdles. The head of the effort, Sigrid Kaag, said security is a top concern.
Security. I think all parties agree that this is, of course, a big concern, always, but it also impacts the safety of any convoy and the safety of any effort. So you need to plan to make everything as secure and safe as possible for the civilian population, for those who need to conduct the operation, and then the government needs to plan for any eventuality in the journey from different sites to Latakia and in Latakia itself.
The Lebanese military says it fired on Syrian helicopters that entered its airspace Monday, marking the first time it's done so during the Syrian conflict. The incident came a day after Lebanon announced it would receive $3 billion in military aid from Saudi Arabia. Israel has released a group of 26 Palestinian prisoners amidst reports it will unveil plans for 1,400 new settlement homes in the West Bank. The prisoners are the third batch to be released since U.S.-brokered peace talks began in July. Both the earlier prisoner releases were also accompanied by the announcement of new settlement plans. Palestinians have warned the settlements could derail the peace talks. Secretary of State John Kerry is returning to the region this week. Speaking Monday, State Department spokesperson Marie Harf said Kerry will present a proposed framework for a peace deal.
During this trip, the Secretary will discuss with both leaders the proposed framework for negotiations. As we said, this framework would serve as guidelines for the permanent status negotiation and would address all the core issues. This is a detailed consultation with the leaders, continuing to work to bridge gaps between the parties, obviously continuing to encourage both sides to take constructive steps, as we said, including the prisoner release this evening in Israel as well.
Burma has begun releasing political prisoners after the government announced an end-of-year amnesty. The Burmese president, Thein Sein, had vowed to release all political prisoners by the end of 2013. The amnesty is expected to include some 40 political prisoners and another 200 who are facing trial or investigation under laws designed to target activists. Among those released today was Yang Neng-tun, who was serving a 7-month sentence for leading a march without permission. He criticized the government after his release.
Even though the government said this is amnesty, this is not amnesty for us. They are trying to hide the weakness of the legislature by doing this. But I respect Mr. President since he kept his promise, because he had not ever kept his promise before.
U.S. regulators have chosen 6 universities and other public entities to develop test sites for domestic drones. The approved test sites are located in at least 10 states, ranging from New York and Massachusetts to Hawaii, Alaska, Nevada, and Texas. The Federal Aviation Administration says the sites will conduct critical research on the requirements needed to safely integrate drones into the national airspace over the next several years. Hundreds of entities, including law enforcement agencies, are already permitted to fly drones. The latest testing is part of a push to use drones for commercial purposes. A new survey finds more than 80% of Americans oppose the war in Afghanistan, making the occupation potentially the most unpopular in U.S. history. The poll by CNN and ORC International found just 17% of Americans support the war, a steep drop from 52% 5 years ago. CNN reports that disapproval numbers are higher than comparable data for both Iraq and Vietnam. only a quarter of Americans want U.S. troops to remain on the ground beyond 2014. But the Obama administration is currently pressuring Afghanistan to accept a deal to keep U.S. troops beyond that deadline. A new U.S. intelligence report predicted U.S. gains from the 12-year conflict will be eroded within 3 years without a large military presence. A new report by the Committee to Protect Journalists says at least 70 journalists died on the job in 2013. At least 29 journalists died covering the civil war in Syria. Another 10 were killed in Iraq. Egypt was the third most violent country for journalists, with 6 killed for their work last year. The report comes as 4 Al Jazeera journalists were interrogated by Egyptian prosecutors following their arrest Sunday evening. We'll have more on Egypt in the new report after headlines. Residents of the small town of Castleton, North Dakota, have been urged to evacuate after a train carrying crude oil collided with another train, triggering a series of explosions. The BNSF railway train stretched about a mile long and was carrying more than 100 oil-laden cars, about 10 of which caught fire. A plume of black smoke could be seen for miles. Authorities said shifting winds could raise the risk of health effects. No injuries have been reported. In Canada, scientists say tar sands oil operations in Alberta are releasing mercury that's impacting an area of more than 7,300 square miles. According to Post Media News, mercury levels in the area are up to 16 times higher than background levels for the region. Mercury is a powerful neurotoxin that can cause brain damage. The Alberta tar sands are the origin point for the Keystone XL pipeline, which would bring oil to the Texas Gulf Coast. A new poll shows the number of Republicans who believe in evolution has dropped 11% since 2009. According to the Pew Research Center, just 43% of Republicans, that's less than half, believe that human beings have evolved over time. By contrast, 67% of Democrats believe in evolution, a slight increase since 2009. And Dr. Kenneth Edelin, an abortion provider and key figure in the struggle for reproductive justice, has died at the age of 74. In 1975, Dr. Edelin, who is African American, was charged with manslaughter after performing a legal abortion in Massachusetts. An all-white, mostly male jury convicted him. He was later acquitted and became an outspoken advocate for the health care rights of women, particularly poor women of color. In a speech posted by Planned Parenthood in 2008, Dr. Edelin hailed the women's movement.
For all those women who marched, for all those women who lobbied, for all those women who died, we say to you today, your lives have always been our concern. Your sacrifice is our motivation. We will continue the fight, and our struggle will go on for as long as it must.
Dr. Kenneth Edelin died from cancer on Monday in Sarasota, Florida. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin in Egypt, which is facing a major escalation of a crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood and other critical voices. The military government has designated the Brotherhood a terrorist organization after a suicide bombing last week that killed 14 people. This came even though the Brotherhood condemned the attack and an unrelated jihadist group claimed responsibility. Using the terrorism label, the Egyptian regime has arrested hundreds of Brotherhood members and seized their assets. It's the latest in a crackdown that began with the ouster of President Mohamed Morsi in July following mass protests against his rule. Since Morsi's overthrow, the Brotherhood has been banned from political activity. Hundreds of its members have been gunned down in the streets and thousands more have been placed behind bars. Meanwhile, the news network Al Jazeera is demanding the immediate release of 4 journalists who've been arrested in Cairo. Correspondent Peter Brest, producers Mohammed Fahmy and Bahar Mohammed, and cameraman Mohammed Fauzi were detained on accusations of spreading false news and holding meetings with the Muslim Brotherhood. Egypt's military government has repeatedly targeted Al Jazeera, raiding offices, ordering an affiliate's closure, and deporting several staffers. The Al Jazeera arrests come as a new report details the dangerous conditions for journalists in Egypt and other troubled areas around the world. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, conditions in Egypt deteriorated dramatically this year, with 6 reporters killed, more than in any previous year. Egypt trailed only Iraq, where 10 journalists were killed, and Syria, where at least 29 journalists were killed. Overall, the Middle East accounted for 2/3 of at least 70 reporters' deaths worldwide. For more, we're joined by 2 guests. Sharif Mansour is with us here in New York, the Middle East and North Africa program coordinator at the Committee to Protect Journalists. And joining us from Egypt, Sharif Abdel-Qaddous, independent journalist, Democracy Now! Correspondent, fellow at the Nation Institute. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Sharif, let's begin with you in Egypt for the overall picture. Talk about the categorizing of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, and then what's come out of that.
Well, Amy, that designation, as you mentioned, came in the wake of a suicide bombing, a car bomb that attacked a police headquarters in a Delta city north of Cairo, killed at least 15 people on December 24th, and really was the deadliest bombing on the Egyptian mainland outside of Sinai in nearly 3 years. And the cabinet, in the wake of that, declared the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization, despite providing no evidence. And even Prime Minister Hazmi al-Badlawi later admitted he had no clear evidence linking the Muslim Brotherhood to the bombing. A Sinai militant group called Ansar Beit al-Maqdis has claimed responsibility for the bombing. They have claimed responsibility for other high-profile attacks, including the assassination of a high-profile, high-ranking state security officer last month in Cairo. But despite that, the crackdown has really targeted the Muslim Brotherhood. The cabinet used that decision of the terrorism designation to freeze the assets of hundreds of charities linked to the group, including hospitals and health clinics. And this is part of as you mentioned, part of a widening crackdown on the group. Just this past Monday, just yesterday, a court in Cairo sentenced 138 pro-Morsi protesters to 2 years in prison on charges of rioting and vandalism, and we've seen thousands of people be thrown behind bars. Reports are now that even the doves of the group, people like Amr Darrag, who were prominent figures of the group who were not imprisoned, have now fled the country. And so the political process, or if there was any left of it that could have included the Muslim Brotherhood, has all but been completely destroyed in 2013. And really, we continue to see instability. The government, the military-backed cabinet, and the military and the police forces continue to say this is a war on terror, and they're trying to provide stability. And yet Egypt is extremely unstable right now. We're seeing an increase in militancy, especially in Sinai. We're seeing a huge number of protests that are centered a lot now on university campuses, with students, some linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, some not, protesting. Students have been killed. And this is all coming with a referendum on the Constitution set to take place in just 2 weeks in the new year.
Before we go to the journalists, 3 leading activists have been sentenced to 3 years in prison as part of an ongoing crackdown on dissent. Ahmed Maher, Ahmed Douma, Mohammed Ado helped lead the uprising that ousted Hosni Mubarak in 2011. They were the first to be sentenced under a new law that effectively bans public protest by requiring 7 different the 3 men chanted "down with military rule" from their cage inside the courtroom. Democracy Now! Spoke with one of the protesters, Ahmed Maher, when he was here in New York back in 2011.
We must to keep struggle and keep fighting until we have real democracy and real country and a good regime and social justice. So we think that will take more than 5 years in transition period. So we must keep fighting now and didn't look to our interest or political party or parliament elections or candidates. That's our goal now, to finish or complete our revolution. Then we can think about political party.
And Sharif, can you talk about the significance of these arrests and now the sentence of 3 years of Ahmed Maher and the others? He was here actually visiting Occupy in 2011, Occupy Wall Street.
Right, well, this crackdown has extended beyond